You know what's fascinating? Most people spend their entire lives becoming themselves, not discovering themselves, not uncovering themselves, but becoming. As if who they truly are is somewhere off in the distance, waiting to be achieved, earned, constructed from scratch like a building that needs the right blueprints and materials. But here's the cosmic joke. You can't become what you already are. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink in. You're sitting there right now, reading these words, and you've probably spent years trying to figure out who you're supposed to be. You've collected advice, followed formulas, mimicked people you admire, tried on different versions of yourself like costumes in a dressing room. And yet, something still feels off. Something still feels incomplete. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because you've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't, who should I become? The question is, who am I when I stop trying to become anything at all? See, becoming your true self isn't about addition. It's about subtraction. It's not about building a better, shinier, more impressive version of you. It's about peeling away the layers of pretense, expectation, and performance until what remains is undeniably, unavoidably real. It's about unlearning rather than learning, undoing rather than doing. But how do you know when this is actually happening? How do you recognize the signs that you're not just playing another game, wearing another mask, following another set of rules that someone else wrote for you? That's what we're going to explore. And I should warn you, some of these signs won't feel like progress. They won't feel like success. They might even feel like failure, like falling apart, like losing ground. Because transformation doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and applause. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it arrives disguised as endings rather than beginnings. So if you're ready to look honestly at where you are and where you're going, let's dive in. The first thing you need to understand is that most of us have been living as imposters. And I don't mean that in some dramatic, malicious way. I mean we've been taught, from the moment we could understand language, that who we naturally are isn't quite enough. That we need to be improved, refined, corrected, shaped into something more acceptable. Your parents meant well. Your teachers meant well. Society, in its clumsy way, meant well. But the message was always the same. Be yourself, but not too much. Express yourself, but within acceptable limits. Follow your heart, but only if your heart wants what we've already approved. So you learn to perform. You learn to read the room, sense what was expected, deliver what would earn you love, approval, security. You became a master translator, constantly converting your true impulses into their socially acceptable equivalents. And over time, the translation became so automatic, so seamless, that you forgot there was an original language underneath. Now here you are. Maybe you're successful by conventional standards. Maybe you've checked the boxes, climbed the ladder, accumulated the symbols of a life well lived, or maybe you're struggling, feeling like you can't quite get it right, can't quite figure out the formula everyone else seems to have mastered. But either way, there's this nagging feeling, this quiet dissonance, like you're watching your own life from behind glass, playing a role in a story someone else wrote. You go through the motions, you say the right things, you maintain the image. But underneath, there's a stranger you barely know, knocking softly, asking to be let out. And here's what makes it complicated. You can't just decide to stop performing. You can't simply shed the mask and expect everything to be fine. Because the mask has been on so long, it feels like your actual face. The role has been played so thoroughly that you're not sure what remains when the curtain falls. So you stay stuck. You oscillate. Some days you're brave enough to show a glimpse of something real, something raw, something unpolished. Other days you retreat back into safety, into the familiar choreography of who you're supposed to be. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. You tell yourself that authenticity is a luxury, that real life requires compromise, that growing up means accepting the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. But the gap grows, and the stranger underneath keeps knocking, and eventually something has to give. That's when the signs start appearing. Not signs that you've arrived, but signs that you've begun the journey. Signs that something in you has decided it's tired of the performance, tired of the translation, tired of living at a distance from your own life. These signs aren't comfortable. They don't come with instruction manuals or congratulatory messages. They come quietly, unexpectedly, often disguised as disruption, and if you're not paying attention, you might mistake them for problems rather than recognizing them for what they truly are, evidence that you're finally coming home to yourself. So let's talk about these signs. Let's shine a light on what's actually happening when you start becoming who you've always been. The first sign is discomfort with your old stories. You know those narratives you've been telling yourself and others for years? The ones that explain who you are, where you came from, why you do what you do? They start feeling hollow. They start feeling like lines from a script you've memorized, but no longer believe. Maybe you've always said you're an introvert who hates social situations, but suddenly you realize you just hated pretending to be someone you're not in those situations. Maybe you've always said you're practical and realistic, but you're starting to feel the weight of all those dreams you buried under that label. The stories that once gave you identity now feel like cages. And the beautiful thing? The moment you notice the cage, you've already begun to open the door. The second sign is the loss of tolerance for fakeness. This is a big one. You find yourself unable to engage in shallow conversations with the same ease you once did. Small talk feels excruciating. Pretense feels suffocating. You can sense when someone is performing, and you can sense when you're performing, and both feel increasingly unbearable. People might think you're becoming difficult, cynical, judgmental, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is your threshold for authenticity has shifted. You're no longer willing to participate in the collective pretense that everything is fine, everyone is happy, and we're all exactly who we appear to be. This doesn't mean you become cruel or harsh. It means you become honest. And honesty, real honesty, is one of the rarest things in the world. The third sign is increasing comfort with solitude. Now, this doesn't mean you become antisocial or isolated. It means you stop being afraid of being alone with yourself. See, most people avoid solitude because in silence, without distraction, they have to face who they actually are. And if you spent your life performing, that encounter can be terrifying. But as you start becoming your true self, something shifts. Solitude stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like coming up for air. You discover that you're actually quite good company, that your own thoughts are interesting, that you don't need constant external validation to feel real, to feel substantial, to feel alive. This is where the paradox lives. The more comfortable you become with yourself, the better your relationships with others become. Because you're no longer relating from a place of need, of desperation, of trying to extract from others what you can't give yourself. You're relating from overflow, from fullness, from genuine curiosity about another consciousness. The fourth sign is the collapse of future fantasies. For years, maybe decades, you've had a vision of who you'll be someday, when you lose the weight, when you get the promotion, when you find the relationship, when you finally figure it all out. This future version of you has been the carrot dangling in front of your face, keeping you running, striving, working towards some moment of arrival when you'll finally be complete. But as you become your true self, something remarkable happens. You stop living in that imagined future, not because you lose ambition or stop growing, but because you realize that this moment, this breath, this imperfect present, is where life is actually happening. The future version of you is just another mask, another story, another way of avoiding the raw reality of now. This can feel like loss, it can feel like giving up, but it's actually the opposite. It's giving in to what already is. It's recognizing that you don't need to wait for permission, for achievement, for transformation to begin living as yourself. You can start now. You can be whole now. You can stop rehearsing for a life that's already in progress. And the fifth sign, the one that ties everything together, is the emergence of spontaneous action. This is subtle but profound. You start doing things not because you should, not because they'll lead somewhere, not because they fit the story you've been telling, but simply because they arise naturally from who you are. You laugh when something is funny without calculating whether your laugh is too loud. You pursue interests without worrying whether they're impressive enough. You speak truth even when it's inconvenient. You make choices based on internal alignment rather than external approval. This doesn't mean you become impulsive or reckless. It means your actions start flowing from essence rather than strategy. There's a quality of ease, of naturalness, of rightness that wasn't there before. You stop second-guessing yourself constantly because you're no longer trying to perform a version of you that requires constant monitoring and adjustment. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because these signs, these markers of transformation, they don't make your life easier in the conventional sense. They make it truer. And truth, my friend, is not always comfortable. When you start becoming your true self, you'll lose some relationships. Not because you become worse, but because you've stopped participating in dynamics that required you to be false. Some people knew you only as the mask you wore. And when the mask comes off, they don't recognize you. And that's okay. That's necessary. That's part of the shedding. You'll also lose some goals, dreams that weren't really yours, ambitions that were borrowed from others' expectations, success as defined by people who don't know your heart. These will fall away, and there might be grief in that loss. Grief for the life you thought you were supposed to want. Grief for the person you worked so hard to become, who was never really you. But what emerges in the space created by this loss? Freedom, breathing room, the possibility of a life that actually fits you instead of one you've been trying to fit into. See, most people think freedom is about having more options, more choices, more possibilities. But real freedom is about needing fewer options because you're clear about who you are. It's about the liberation that comes from no longer being at war with yourself, no longer spending energy maintaining an image, no longer translating your truth into something more palatable. This is what the mystics have been trying to tell us for thousands of years. This is what sits at the heart of every authentic spiritual tradition. You are already whole. You are already complete. The journey is not about becoming something you're not, but about recognizing what you've always been underneath the conditioning, underneath the performance, underneath the fear. And here's the thing that will blow your mind. The moment you truly see this, the moment you really get it, nothing changes and everything changes. You're the same person you were yesterday. Same body, same history, same circumstances. But your relationship to all of it transforms. You stop being the anxious protagonist of a story that needs to turn out right. You become the aware space in which the story unfolds. Does this mean you stop having preferences? Stop pursuing goals? Stop wanting your life to improve? Not at all. But the quality of the wanting changes. It's no longer desperate, no longer attached. You want things the way you want to take a walk on a beautiful day. You move toward what genuinely calls you, not what you think should call you, and people will notice. They'll sense something different about you, though they might not be able to name it. Some will be attracted to it. Some will be threatened by it. Because authenticity is contagious, and it reminds people of their own distance from themselves. Your freedom can be a mirror that's uncomfortable to look into. But you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you come to understand. Once you catch a glimpse of your true nature, once you taste that freedom, you can't pretend to forget. The performance becomes impossible to sustain with the same conviction it once had. So here we are. I've pointed to the signs, I've described the territory. But here's what I need you to understand. This isn't something you figure out intellectually. You can't think your way into authenticity. You can't strategize your way into being yourself. This is about relaxation, not effort. It's about letting go, not holding on tighter. It's about trusting what arises naturally instead of constantly trying to engineer the right outcome. And yes, this is terrifying, because we've been taught that life is something you control, something you manage, something you force into the shape you want. We've been taught that who you are is something you build, brick by careful brick, according to the right blueprint. But what if that's backwards? What if who you are is what remains when you stop building, when you stop performing, when you stop trying so hard to be anything at all? You might ask, but won't I become selfish? Won't I hurt people? Won't everything fall apart if I stop trying to hold it all together? And the answer is, maybe some things will fall apart. The things that were held together by pretense, by performance, by your willingness to betray yourself for temporary peace. But what's built on truth? What arises from genuine alignment? That gets stronger. That becomes more real. That endures. Being your true self doesn't mean being thoughtless or cruel. It means your kindness comes from genuine compassion rather than fear. Your generosity comes from fullness rather than obligation. Your love comes from choice rather than need. This is the paradox. The more yourself you become, the more you're able to genuinely connect with others, because you're no longer projecting, no longer demanding they complete you, no longer using them as mirrors to confirm an identity you're uncertain about. So what do you do with all of this? How do you actually walk this path? You start by paying attention. You notice when you're performing and when you're being real. You notice the gap between what you actually feel and what you express. You notice the stories you tell and ask yourself if they're still true. You notice the relationships that require you to be small and the ones that invite you to be whole. And then, in small ways, in moments that feel manageable, you practice showing up as you actually are, not as some grand declaration or dramatic transformation, but in tiny acts of truth, in saying no when you mean no, in pursuing what genuinely interests you, in letting yourself be seen even when it's uncomfortable. You won't get it right all the time. You'll still perform sometimes. You'll still hide sometimes. You'll still forget and fall back into old patterns. That's part of being human. But slowly, gradually, the balance shifts. The real becomes more familiar than the fake. The truth becomes more comfortable than the lie. And one day, you'll look around and realize something has fundamentally changed. Not because you achieved some state of perfection, but because you stopped trying to be anything other than what you are. And in that stopping, in that surrender, in that profound acceptance, you discovered what you'd been searching for all along. You found yourself. Not the improved version, not the future version, not the version others wanted, but the actual you. The one who was always here, waiting patiently beneath the performance, ready to come home. The door is open. It always has been. The only question is, are you ready to walk through?